Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you so much for showing up for another episode. We're continuing to move along, and man, the conversations I've had in the last couple of weeks is expanding the conversation, right? Because so often these podcasts around men and fatherhood could be in these spaces that typically talk about things that are pain points for many people, but don't allow you to understand and receive the full breadth with respect to who we are as men and how we show up in the space, how we think, how we function, how we emotion, right? I listened the other day to an interview on NPR that has got my attention, and I want to dig a little deeper into this, but it was a young man who runs an organization called the Hidden Brain. And the conversation was around emotional regulation. And it was a fascinating conversation because what I got out of it was that there's some elements of that can specifically be spoken about as it relates to men and more specifically to fathers with respect to emotional regulation. And so that is kind of where these conversations are going. And that's how it's going to go today, because our guest today is a renowned therapist. And today's show guest, he is Dr. George James. He's going to join I Am Dad podcast today. He is a media personality, a relationship expert whose powerful insights have helped thousands of people navigate love, fatherhood, leadership, and life. A licensed marriage and family therapist, Dr. James is the CEO of George Talks LLC and an assistant professor at the Thomas Jefferson University. You may have seen him on the Today Show, CBS Mornings, CNN, CNBC, or you might have seen him in Ebony and the New York Times. But with an unmatched ability to connect, inspire, and educate, Dr. James works with everyone from couples and parents to athletes, entertainers, and corporate leaders, helping them find clarity, connection, and purpose in their personal and professional lives. Today, we're going to be diving into his personal experiences as a father, as a husband, the critical work he does in healing relationships, and how we all can be more intentional in how we show up for our children, our partners, and ourselves. Let's bring Dr. James to the stage. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. I'm so glad to be on the podcast. So glad to be talking with you as always. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your work. I appreciate it. I mean, we have this, I always tell people that I've been blessed with a tribe of brothers that we may not always communicate with each other on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis, but we are all fans of each other, right? And while we are grinding, trying to do our own thing, we are celebrating the brilliance of us in the social space, talking about whatever it is we're talking about. And we just happen to be Black men. Right? We just basking in the glory of who we are and what we're trying to bring to the space where people don't typically hear our voice, right? Family, marriage, relationships, emotions, right? Love. It's like, what? Y'all talking
Yeah.
about what? Y'all talking about
Yep.
men. You can't be talking about men and talking about that stuff. Yeah, yes, we are. Every day, all day, and on Saturday. We're doing it all.
That's
And
right.
so what I like for you to do, because we start our podcast off where I like people to really kind of delve into this a little bit, and you can tell this narrative however you feel comfortable in telling it. But I always ask our guests to tell their daddy story.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate once again the opportunity to be here. I really love that question, and it's something that I've thought about and have had multiple points along that journey. So my father is originally from Jamaica. He came to the U.S. after marrying my mom, who is also from Jamaica. She came to the U.S. first, and then they moved to the U.S., and I was born in the U.S. And for a major part of my upbringing, my dad would go back and forth to Jamaica. So part one was feeling the absence of my dad during that time. So for months he'd be away in Jamaica, and I wouldn't know or understand like why he wasn't there, just that he was in Jamaica.
Mhm.
Over time, I started to learn more about my dad, and that created some sadness, that created some hurt, that created some anger, that created some confusion around like just that connection and that relationship. My parents were always married. It was just non-traditional this way that they had, kind of like what we might see even with some couples, right? They were together but apart,
Mhm.
and they navigated that. And then when they were in the same space, there'd be like what we would think with a couple over time. And I think this was as my dad got older and got ill, and I actively cared for him. uh, I I also learned more things. Actually, it was becoming a therapist that first helped me to learn things. Becoming a therapist allowed me to be more inquisitive and want to know, like, oh, what about this and what about that? And I was able to ask my dad questions in my early 20s that I probably wouldn't have asked him otherwise.
Mhm.
I started to learn other parts about him, about relationships before my mom, or why he did this or why he did that, and that started to help. And then, so I started to see him as a person who makes choices and decisions, some good ones, some not so good ones. And then as he got older and sick, and then as he passed, I think I was able to make sense because I was hurt. I was frustrated. I think there was a part of me that was like, what did my dad leave me when he passed? And I got to the place with really great help and insight from really others of realizing that my dad left me the ability to do what I'm doing now,
Mhm.
from his sacrifices. My dad left me the inheritance of hope and positivity because he was a farmer in Jamaica as well as an entrepreneur in lots of ways. And I didn't really think about what it means to be a farmer. That you got to plant something and hope
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Mhm.
believe that something is going to come from that. And I find myself to be a positive and optimistic person. And my dad, as I mentioned, was an entrepreneur, and so this that there's lots of ways in my life entrepreneurship has been big, and in my family. So my daddy's story moved from someone I enjoyed. He was a great storyteller. He was someone that was charismatic, people loved. He was also moody and grumpy, like all those things, and missing time with him and then learning more about, oh, he was making these choices because that's the way he felt he could show up for the family,
Mhm.
but he didn't communicate. And so as much as I think he would have been good, and then over time learning what I got from him and how I've continued some of that legacy that I learned from him, and how I've tried to push forward in ways of how I communicate and how I uh, show up even in my own family.
Mhm.
And so there's things that are similar and things that are different, but I'm grateful, and I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to care for him and to be there for him until his death.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm always, as I'm listening to you, like the journey into our work is so unique in the sense that there was no point in my high school journey that I said, you know what, I want to work with fathers. That's what I want to grow up. Like, somebody said, hey, little Kenny, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a fatherhood advocate, right? Yeah,
Right.
that's what I want to do. Like, what? Like, when you think about your journey into your space, what do you think came first? The thirst to understand those elements that were impacting you in the family space, or the desire to actually work with families, couples, and parents and help them in their own journeys?
Yeah, I think it was the first part, right? I think it's understanding the world I grew up in and the disconnects that I saw. So I think there's three parts that I think that fuel those early beginnings. I think it was growing up in a Christian household and going to church and seeing folks who said that they loved each other, cared about each other. And in my mind, love and connection meant you might sit next to each other.
Mm,
And like people didn't sit next to each other, or people would talk to each other in ways that just didn't feel kind. As a kid, you just, or a young person, you can overhear and you can see things. And so I remember that image vividly of like, wow, these are people who say they love God, love each other, but it's just not always coming off the way that I think it should. And it made me question.
mm,
I think also my parents loved each other deeply and they had a great relationship. And as I mentioned earlier, it was non-traditional in this way of like, how much time did they actually spend together? Now they were together probably 40 plus years, right? And they also had a lot of time that they weren't together. And so that and also learning about my family history, learning about my uncles and the men on my father's side and some of the things they did and got into,
mhm,
affairs, children and all that stuff, and how that shaped how I wanted to be as a person. And then, the other vivid memory is also the Cosby Show, right?
mhm,
Like growing up in the era of like thinking about like, oh, like what it means to be a Black family and the possibility of being together and being connected. And that I saw enough examples to know that it is possible, but there's something that is missing from where people are to kind of get there.
mhm,
I think when I put all those things together, I think there was that intrigue, but I didn't know it initially because I wanted to be a medical doctor. I
mhm,
didn't know that like you said, it wasn't like I grew up saying I wanted to be a therapist or I saw a therapist or any of those things or wanted to work with relationships. It wasn't until the end of my sophomore year I moved from biology to psychology, and I still didn't know it then. And so it wasn't until going into grad school and the first probably semester of learning what it means to work with people, work with couples, work with the family system, that I said, this is it. This is part of my purpose.
mhm. I was in the bank this morning. It's a young lady. She just started working there, and we started chatting one day. And I came in, and I had on a Biggie sweatshirt. And she goes, "Oh my God, I love that sweatshirt." And we just started chatting, and then found out that she grew up in Brooklyn, like
Nice.
me. And so we had that. Once we find our Brooklyn tribe, it's on from there, right?
Right.
And so we were chatting, and this morning went through, and she had on a royal blue blouse. And I said, "Are you a Zeta?" And she goes,
Mhm.
"What's that?" I was like, "Oh my goodness." I said, "It's a sorority." I said, "And that's that color royal blue."
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, "You don't typically see sisters wearing royal blue unless they're Zetas." And so it's like you got to ask that question
Right.
first. And she goes, "Oh," she said, "that wasn't um my past." She said, "I didn't go to a college like that. I went to a community college." And I said, "College is college. Where you learn what you learn is what you learn." I said, "There's no distinction between whether or not." I said, "Don't ever think that because you didn't go to a 4-year traditional institution that education trumps what you know and understand." I said, "And also, you can always go now." And she said, "Well, I can't really um, afford that 40K that it takes to go there." And I said, "Well, I said, you work for an institution." She's in the bank. I said, "You work for an institution that I'm sure has ways of paying for your tuition." I said, "But you got to ask." And she
Hmm.
said, "Oh man," she goes, "I really want to go to school to learn psychology." She said, "Psych." And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "What I really want to go for is I really want to go so I can understand myself." And I thought, whoa,
Yeah.
like I wonder in your space, and even for you and your wife, is there always a heavy need to answer your own questions, even in the gist of trying to help others?
Yeah. It is. I mean, one, that's awesome that you had that conversation and then, you're total relationship guy, and the way that you're able to get people to share. And I've always loved and admired that about you,
Mhm.
and the way that you deepen your connections. You got like decades long connections and friendships
Mhm.
that spark from like a bank relationship like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think for me and for many people, there's a belief that people get in the field of psychology or therapy to answer some unanswered question in their life,
Mhm.
right? That majority of the people that are doing the work somehow are trying to figure something out. And that's what initially brings them in.
Mhm.
And then in doing that, they might be able to help other people. And even if I think about myself, once again, I wanted to help, couples. That was the very first thing. I want to help couples, and I want to help men.
Mhm.
Was the thing that I think about, going back to my daddy's story, going back to my family growing up. I wanted to support men because I've never believed the myths, the unhealthy myths that were out there about men.
Mhm.
And I knew that men were emotional. I knew that men, I still believe that men are sensitive. I knew that I believe that men do talk and had examples, but but wanted to support that narrative, the healthy part of that. So I think that's there. And what I've learned with my wife and I'm so grateful that because of going down the path of becoming a therapist, of learning more about life and people, picking up these different tips and skills and tools, I'm a better person. I'm a better man. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. Just because of that, that's allowed me to to have a better relationship. And my wife, most days, if not all days, will give me some credit for some of the things that we've learned together along the way to just be in a better space together. We're not perfect,
Mhm.
like anybody else, but I think there's some things that we have been able to do better because of the things that we've learned along the way.
Yeah, I want to jump in the relationship side, but I want to hang on the parent side just for a hot
Yeah.
second because, one of the things that I know, when it comes to uh, our own trajectory in this space is really trying to understand for the sake of being a better parent, right? And really understanding, where my parents might have gone wrong and where I might not want to go down that same path to get into those spaces. When you, and particularly with your wife, because I chuckle at when you talked about her, which is why I want to not jump into the relationship piece, but I am going to ease into it here. My wife and I took life coaching training together. And so it's like a year and a half going through this training, and we graduated. And there was this night we were having a disagreement about something. And like she's talking to me, and there's this moment where I was like, are you breadcrumbing me right now? Like it's like you using a tactic that we've learned over the last year.
Yes.
Have you ever had that moment where you're in real life and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, am I in therapy right now?
All the way. Like my wife is actually in public health, but we've spent so much of our life growing together and learning that we've influenced each other. Her understanding and thoughts around public health and the work that she does has influenced me in my practice,
Mm,
and my life, and my work. And my work in therapy and mental health has influenced her. And there are times where she just turn around and say something I said. Oh, wait, wait, whoa, whoa! How are you using my what I do against me? That's not cool.
right.
Or even the times when we've said like, oh, this would be a good seminar to go to. I really enjoyed it. And she's like, oh, whatever. Then we eventually do the seminar. It's like, oh, we got to tell other people about this. Wait, 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 didn't I say that?
Right.
So like there's lots of ways that I've so grateful for her because I've grown in so many ways. And just to give an example, right? Like as a therapist, I've worked with lots of couples and people dealing with, let's say, affairs and cheating, and I'm helping them to recover and repair. But in my early days, I never asked them, "Did you use a condom?"
Mm,
Right? I would just think about, "Hey, are you working through it? Are you getting better? Or are you making amends?" Like all the therapy stuff.
hmm
But because of my wife's work in public health and the health connection and the disparities, the thought of creating STD as a result of that affair, or how that could impact the partner, like all those things, and condom or birth control, like either way, whomever was the person who cheated,
Mhm.
like that thought was influenced by my wife, and it's been a part of my work for a long time. So the way that we've been able to influence each other and through tactics and different things has really been great.
Yeah, because I do recognize when we're using our tactics on our kids. I do like, we kind of team up and it's like, all right, we know the play on this one. This is how you gonna go after him this way, and I'm gonna
That's
go
right.
after him this way, and then we'll meet in the middle. As you were in the beginning stages of like, meeting each other and beginning to build your own futures, um, working together, was that intentional or did that just kind of organically happen?
If I think all the way back, uh, probably a dream of mine was always to someone I marry and be in a relationship with. I would love that we can do things together.
Mhm.
And it never necessarily was like, oh, we have to be in like full-time business, but I just somewhere believe that the person that I'm connected with, my partner, my spouse, would be someone that we could do the work, whatever that is, together. And my wife and I just was able to do that from early years, presentations, conferences, all the way to like we now host a date night event once a year for couples, and we actively plan, co-plan, work together. It was generated by my idea, but as you know, anything you might start it, but right away, like it's us, and she's
Mhm.
in it with me, and she's an active person where she speaks and I speak, and then we speak together. And so that's been a real blessing for me to be able to work and partner, truly partner with my wife in multiple ways, professionally, and in our work that we do for others. And so that's been, I think, just something I've enjoyed from the very beginning. And I think that I've seen her evolution as someone in the public, and I've seen my evolution in being able to think about some of the details that I
Mhm.
normally wouldn't have
Mhm.
because of her influence.
When you now that you're in the space of relationships, um, it's an age old profession, right? Therapists have been trying to help people with their relationships since the Flintstones, right? The question is, why are these issues still issues since we've been working on it for this long? What tends to be the consistent thing that serve as a barrier in healthy relationships with people today?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to, and this is where I'll bridge some of the things that you've been doing. I think it's very similar to what we see with fathers and just parents in general.
Mhm.
We tend to repeat either what we've seen
Mm,
or what's been told to us,
mhm,
right? They might not be true, or it might not be the full thing, right? So, like, how do I become a father? Is like I sometimes either say I'm going to be what I saw, or I'm going to be the opposite. How do I become a good father? Is usually I have intervention, and there's mentors and examples and experiences that shape me to be better.
mhm,
And I think the same thing with a relationship is that we tend to repeat some of the unhealthy things that we've seen, or the unhealthy things that have been taught to us.
mhm,
How do we become better at relationships? There usually has to be some intervention, something that happens, a book we read, a podcast we listen to, a relationship series, therapy that we do that helps us to be better.
mhm,
But the reason why it stays as a age-old challenge is that many of us aren't willing to reflect and look at ourselves.
mm, mhm,
And then to do that with two people where we both have to be willing to do that pretty much at the same time, it's hard. One
mhm,
person might be reflective and vulnerable, the other person's not. Then they switch. But to get both people around the same time, reflective and understanding and willing to try to do something different,
mhm,
even a small difference,
mhm.
that sometimes is what the challenge is. And then we go right back to those old patterns.
Yeah, I was doing a keynote somewhere, And I'm sure you've done this too. In the middle of your keynote, you have an epiphany about something and you talk about it and you're like, where did that just come from? But it comes from because you're in the space and you're talking. And I was talking about first dates, and I was talking about the things we look for, when we meet people. And a lot of times those things could be aesthetics. It could be, her skin tone, the length of her hair, those kinds of things. If I was then who I am now, what I look for wouldn't be external, it would be internal. And I
Yeah.
said, and one of the things, and this is in the middle of my conversation talking about this, I said, I think that one of my top priorities would be to connect with someone who understood how to negotiate conflict.
Mm. Yeah. It's a big thing, and one of the things that my wife and I have talked about is that one of the biggest things that can influence your life, from my perspective, is who you choose to partner with.
Mm,
Like, it could literally take your life down a whole lane,
mhm,
good or bad,
mhm,
and being able to choose someone that can, navigate conflict, work through conflict, is willing to even address when there is something that needs to be worked on and not kinda hold it, or when it is something to work on, they're not coming at you in a certain way.
mhm,
Like, that is huge. I've worked with lots of people where that ends up being the thing, that's what their relationship is known for. They are
mhm,
always in conflict. They're always
mhm,
at each other.
mhm,
And I think, once again, this comes back to this narrative around how do we develop as fathers, and men. I think sometimes there's a struggle of, like, all right, now I'm feeling this conflict. I'm feeling attacked. How do I be vulnerable? If I'm vulnerable, will you use that against me, or
right.
will I somehow, like, end up in a bad place? And the examples I've seen, like, all right, I'm not going to do that, and I hold it, and now who suffers? I suffer, my partner suffers, the children suffer, just because of these messages that we hold on to. Now, thankfully, a lot more men are willing to push past that, to show up for themselves and their children and their spouse or partner, but it's a lot that we have to emotionally work through to get there.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's still a lot of stigmatism with respect to things like therapy and counseling. Do you still see couples that come to you that are still in resistant of that a little bit and can't get over the hump because they still don't know how to receive critical and corrective, constructive, you know, direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's usually one person who's more of the person that says they want this to happen,
Mhm,
right? And typically, over the years, that's been more women, but I've definitely seen more men who are like, "No, I want this," or "No, I want to. Let's go to therapy," or let's talk about this," or and so I think there's usually one person who's more all in than the other, and the dance, the art, this of it all is, how do you get both people to lock in and say
mhm,
that they want to do it? Some of that is believing that there is possibility that it can be better. Um, and then sometimes it doesn't. Like, that's also one of the things I've had to learn, is that sometimes it's not going to work out.
mhm,
Sometimes you are better as co-parents than as parents together. Sometimes you are better if we can figure it out separately than actually together.
mhm. It's actually one of the things that I've been hanging on lately. I'm actually thinking about expanding our work a little bit into the relationship space. And I've been having these conceptual conversations with folks about how I'm seeing that,
Mhm.
in the sense that I don't want to be in the romantic relationship space. I want to be in the co-parenting relationship space. I think that the
Yeah.
key is relationship. It's not the nature of the relationship, it is relationship. And where I can teach people skills
Yeah.
to relate better to people, whether it is the romantic partner, your landlord, your employer,
Yeah.
law enforcement, where I can teach people about navigating relationship, the better off they're going to be. When you're working with couples, are you seeing that they oftentimes struggle with simply relating to each other?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that what I see in working with couples is that the challenge that they have with each other, usually that challenge is also someplace else, right? Like,
Mm,
how is your relationship with your sibling, with your parent, with your coworker? Like, usually it's more intense with our romantic partner,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sometimes can be seen. Even in the most recent conversation I had with someone, they're like, "Yeah, that did happen with how my mom treated my dad, and I learned that way, and so that's how I treat him." And then, like, all of a sudden, like, "Oh, okay, there's those things," or like, "Yeah, that's how I saw with my the men in my family, and so yeah, I didn't really pay attention, or I didn't really care, and I'm doing the same thing." But I love what you're saying about the co-parenting space and how we relate to other people, because that's actually how my work has expanded.
Mm-hmm.
I started entrenched in couples and even parenting a little bit, and then I moved to men, then I moved to athletes and entertainers. Now that work has now got me working with family owned businesses, family foundations. But the work I'm doing is, how are they relating to each other?
Mm-hmm.
What is their interpersonal dynamics? And it's the same stuff I was doing and still do occasionally with couples.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of work with, how do we connect? How do we speak to each other? How do we navigate those moments where you feel frustrated? What do you say? If you're angry at your child, is that the best time to say that? Is there a different way? How do you discipline without going over like, all those things are about relationships that show up at home, at work, and in the community.
Mm-hmm. We're entering, or we're in the midst of now, a new administration who have traditionally looked at family differently, and hang their hats on the notion of marriage, right? That marriage is the key, it is the solution. My response to that is, outcomes don't deny that, right? Research doesn't deny that. Absolutely. When children grow up in two parent households, healthy households with the mother and father, their children fare better. We get it. The part that I disconnect with a little bit is in this whole notion of the success sequence that says that children have to go through a certain pathway in order to be successful. Meaning they got to graduate from high school, they have to go to college, they have to find their soulmate in college, they get connected, they graduate from college, they boo up, they get married, they buy a house, and then they have kids, the dog, and then the picket fence. That's an
Yeah.
old 1960s sitcom. It does happen that way for some people. The question is when that sequence does not occur, can someone still be successful in relationship and being married? And then here's where I want to lean in on you. And if we're going to have this conversation, the conversation has to be in context of marriage is not a destiny, it's a journey. And
Hmm.
if you think about it from a journey perspective, you are focused on the things that are happening to you real time in order
Yeah.
to have a successful marriage, as opposed to the wedding day,
Yeah.
where it often never identifies and describes the marriage itself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so many things. My wife and I have talked about, and she shared this, and every time she's shared it, it's been impactful to me. You go to the wedding day, you get to the wedding day thinking like, I am so in love with this person, and that's actually still the beginning of your love.
Mm,
Right? It is the marriage journey that really strengthens and deepens that love. The love we have for each other now, about to celebrate 18 years, is far deeper than the day that we thought we were at the height of our love.
right.
Right? It was a good day, it was a great moment, but that was a small bucket, drip, drop in the bucket in terms of our love and our connection with each other. So it is a journey, and there are lots of people who I feel are successful in so many ways. They go through their path. I think that one of the things that has been impactful for me, that I try as a father with my children, is exposure. Like,
Mm,
I think when we are exposed to things, even exposed to a mindset, exposed to the possibility, exposed to belief, like having someone believe in you,
mhm,
like, I think when you have those things, it can lead to success. And I think it also relates to relationships. When you have someone that believes in you, when you have someone that believes that in love and the possibility, I think that adds to it. Even having people around you, other couples or people that you can gravitate to ask them questions, that matters. And, lastly, my wife and I, we didn't know when we got married that my parents would both end up sick and dealing with dementia, and
Mm,
that we had to take care of them in our home
mhm,
while raising two young kids.
mhm.
But because we had a relationship, and thankfully, because I had a wife that is so amazing, we were able to partner together to do that.
Right,
For other relationships, that would have taken them out.
right.
I know it. I've seen it. And
Mhm.
so you don't know what can happen, but you hope that you've picked enough based off of values and hopes and goals, and that when life does throw those curveballs, that you can navigate that.
Yeah. I often tell people that, the value of my wife has always been exposed to me in small, unexpected moments. Right? We keep looking for this big thing that says, "Oh my goodness, I love this woman to death." And that's not when that feeling comes. It
Yeah.
comes when I had COVID,
Yeah.
Dr. James, and I'm in this room. And this was before the respirators and all this stuff. This was when COVID was taking people out,
Yeah.
right? And I come out of the hospital after a week, and I'm in this room in my house literally for almost 40 days. And I can't come out.
Yeah.
And but like clockwork, my wife would come in, she'd have her mask on, she'd have a Lysol on her arm and all, stuff.
Yeah.
And then she'd hand me my plate with my food and she'll say, "Is you good?" And then she would leave. And it's
Mm.
in that moment, it's
Yes.
like if I didn't have relationship,
Yes.
not marriage,
Yeah. Yeah.
if I didn't have committed
Yeah.
10 toes down,
Yeah.
1000%, I'm here for better or for worse relationship, I
Yeah.
would be in this room by my damn self.
Yep. Yep. And it could be far worse, right? And that's where the skills of how to relate, how to treat each other are so important. I learned those skills through therapy. Someone else might say, I learned that through like growing up in this community, or I learned that from my first three jobs. But if we can pay attention to the skills of connecting and relating to folks and deepen it with vulnerability, that's when we see it show up in those moments where somebody's willing to care and show care for you, not because we got some license that we're married, or that we have some profession, but that because I care for you,
Mhm,
I love you, and I'm willing to do that.
mhm. Now, you were able to pick up on the strong points and the weak points of your parents parenting you and be able to really kind of frame that. But how, as parents, do we intentionally move that downhill to our
Yeah.
kids? What does that look like?
Yeah. So when I think about my parents and their hard work, one, the way that I intentionally carry them with me, both my parents have passed. How I carry that with me is I talk about them. I talk about their journey, and I share that with my children. I share that with the world. I have a keynote I give called I Give Myself Permission. I'm always talking about my parents in that keynote and the ways they did give themselves permission and the ways they didn't,
Mhm,
and as a way to inspire other people. And in our household, I think about exposure. How do we expose our children to things? My parents, they came from Jamaica to the US, exposed me to a different life, and that also helped me to do the things I'm doing. So I'm trying to carry that forward with my own children. One of the things I mentioned, my dad was an entrepreneur, but he needed help, and I think he struggled with asking for help. But I introduced that to my children earlier. We're a household of entrepreneurs. I came home for a conference when my daughter was 6 and asked her, "Do you want to start a t-shirt business?" She said, "Yeah." And then from there, she later on she learned how to crochet. She started doing that.
mhm,
Last year, she developed a mental health coloring book for kids as a eighth grade project in school, and then we helped her turn that into a book that now is available on Amazon. Right. So
mhm,
like we've been able to facilitate that, like, thought of your thoughts and ideas can create things that people might want. You don't necessarily have to go into business, but I just teach that with them.
mhm,
The other side, though, I've realized that this moment sticks out for me as a father with my son, and I think being in being a therapist, being around other people, hearing other people's stories helped me in this moment. There was a moment where my son was doing something that was just not okay. And I was disciplining him by like saying, "Hey, that's not okay." And I went into his room. I was there and I could just see his eyes become like really like deer in the headlights, overwhelmed because I was so much in his space and he felt cornered.
Mm.
And I'm like, "Man, this is the stuff that people feel and talk about." And I'm 6'3", I'm a big guy, like, I'm taking a lot of space and, he is between the wall and me. And I was like, in that moment, even though he needed to be disciplined, even though he needed some correction, he also needed some love and kindness. And so I said, hey, let's just move over here, right? Let's move outside of this corner. Let's move here. And I took my tone down and then started to still correct, but do it differently.
Mhm.
And I think for me, that's the example of like, how am I moving forward with not some of the older ways of dealing with things? How am I using the interventions that have happened that I've learned to then impact my kids? That I believe in discipline and boundaries.
Mhm.
I also believe in thoughtfulness and kindness and vulnerability. My kids have seen me cry and they've seen me be able to like kind of correct them on something they need to do.
But that's mindfulness, right? That's being in the moment. And oftentimes we were never taught
Yeah.
to be in the moment. It was about what's down the line when
Yeah.
I'm trying to prevent you from not settling in the moment and being able to your point, there's a wall between us. And he's a little kid and I'm
Yeah.
6'3". Like that's a mindfulness thing you have to go through as a man because we're so forward thinking.
Yeah.
Even I remember one time my wife and I had this conversation where I was really big on not arguing in front of our children. And one day we was talking and she was like, and I was like really adamant about it. And she said, Kenny, how are they going to learn how to resolve conflict? And how are they going to be able to see that we can still be good after conflict? Like they have to see the process, not just you're stuck in this thing that's happening right now, because every time it happens, you're remembering that thing from the past,
Yeah.
right? Because you couldn't see the process in the past. All you can see was the thing. She says, but we need our kids to see the process, which is, yeah, daddy, mommy was just screaming and yelling at each other in a few minutes, but she still brought him dinner, right? And the
Yeah.
next day he brought her breakfast. And the next
Yeah.
day they're laughing in the kitchen. So
Yeah.
that thing is not so big in their life anymore
Yeah.
because now they've seen the process. And I often wonder because we're also in the space of grantees around the country who are funded to do both fatherhood work and relationship work. Do we really take enough time in those spaces to really emphasize the journey and not just the one, two, threes of what we believe it takes to have a great relationship?
Yeah. No, I think it's so important to highlight that there is a journey and needs to be a journey. I mean, even the messages I try to share with my children is around like yeah, you're gonna grow. And yeah, I get it. Like it's an age old thing. Like people telling you that like it's gonna get better. But I also understand right now it kind of doesn't feel so good.
Right.
Right. Like it is a journey. And I think that being able to really say that, because I think it's all of those things, right? Like if you never show your children conflict, then they don't know it exists. But if you show your kids so much conflict, then it overwhelms them,
Hmm.
right? So, and it's not perfect, right? It's just really trying to navigate, like, you know what? We can't show them everything,
Hmm.
but we can't show them nothing. And like, there are times where I'll just hug and kiss my wife i- in front of them because I want them to see affection. I want them to see that connection. There might be a time where, like, there's a song and I might just dance with my wife because I want them to see that, right? But now, do they say all the time that we're dancing and hugging and kissing?
Right.
No, right? But like, so it's this trying to provide, coming back, I think my theme for today is exposure
Hmm.
that gives them enough to be able to see and learn and then develop on their own and have their own curiosities and their own thoughts as they move forward.
The sensationalism of this conversation, typically, when you're talking about relationships, is around what could be described as the biggest pain point, and that is infidelity. Like, is that still the biggest pain point when it comes to couples and the reason that they come to you?
I think it's the biggest kind of pain. It's the deepest wound that
Mm.
I've seen people
It's not
experience.
the biggest, it's the deepest.
It's the deepest wound. Like when you are betrayed, like just think about we've all been betrayed by somebody in one way or another.
Mm.
But when you're betrayed in your relationship, it takes you through all types of situations and emotions. I've seen people go from rage to tears to trying to do whatever they can to reconnect with the person, all in 24 hours, right? Like
Mm.
all of that happens. So I feel like it's a deep wound. And what I've recognized from the work is that the pain point started before the infidelity in most relationships.
Mm.
There's someone who they just cheat to cheat, whoever it is,
Mm.
man, woman, doesn't whatever. Uh, but usually there's a pain point that was significant prior to the cheating that is either unaddressed or not worked through that now created the door for the infidelity. And I'm always very clear. And then the person made the choice to cheat.
Mm.
That's on them.
Mm.
But what was happening before was a dynamic in the relationship.
Right. What are the indicators that couples should be paying attention to that may say to them, you need some help outside of yourselves?
Yeah, I think that going back to feeling like we are repeating this negative cycle, like we are arguing in a hostile way. Even going back to the thought of marriage, what you said earlier, what we've also realized is that when children are in a household where people are married, but it's toxic,
Mm.
it's actually hurtful and harmful to them and their development, right? So if you find that you are constantly arguing in a negative, harmful way, calling names, doing all things, throwing things, like that's not good, right? If you find yourself that you are unhappy and not really saying to your spouse or partner what's going on with you, if you find that there's a lot of hurtful things that are being done, like infidelity or even financial security that is just not being kind of managed. And then I think probably at a core level, if you find that your values are being um, not respected, I think those are things that you probably need some help and some support.
Hmm. What's been your biggest relationship success? A relationship that started out A, but ended up in a space where you walked away and said, you know what? You good. That was good. Yeah, that was hot.
Oh, that's a good question. And I feel like when I think about certain parts of my career, it's allowed me to just be in lots of different and unique spaces.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess what I would think about it is, and just thinking about your question, the podcast that I did for a number of years was called Leapcast, and you were one of the guests on there,
Hmm.
and I'm so grateful for that. And I remember when I was starting out, like I was able to reach out and get Brian Dawkins. I'm in the Philadelphia area. The
Hmm.
Eagles are big. Brian Dawkins is like an icon in Philly, and being able to get him on when I really had no connections to him,
Hmm.
and it was somebody said, "Oh, you should have him on." One, that the fact that somebody believed that I could just like call him up and just have him on was a way that, oh, like, oh, people who actually see me in this way. And then I reached out to his people. I built a connection there. Reached out to another set of people, built a connection there, and I was able to. And I didn't have like the biggest podcast that would maybe generate the numbers that maybe he would even need,
Hmm.
but he was able to come on. And I think that it was not because of like I was some big star, but because I think I was willing to develop the connection and the relationship, and he saw something good in me and say, you know what, I like this guy, right?
Hmm.
And I've had that happen multiple times in my life where somebody said, you know, I like this guy, or I like the cut of this guy, or I like connecting with this guy, or I feel like I'm, whether it be, a young person all the way to an athlete or a business owner, and that has opened up many opportunities for me.
What's in the future for you, bro? I know you got something up the sleeve. What you cooking right now?
Well, right now, what's on deck, and I'm super excited about, is that I I have been doing this talk called I Give Myself Permission. And then last year in 24, I got a book contract to write that book. And then the end of last year and to the beginning of this year, I completed writing the book. And then I went through the edits of it. And that book is now complete. It is actually available for pre-order, called I Give Myself Permission by
Okay.
George James. And I'm excited that it comes out. Right now, they're still deciding between early December, early December of 25, early January of 26. But that I was able to write a book, which has always been a goal, and to have somebody to say we will give you a contract to write this book was really great. So that's what's cooking right now, as well as just working on a whole bunch of other things around that whole platform of encouraging people to give themselves permission.
Yeah, that's dope. That's so I have to have you back on another platform that I'm cooking right now. I'm building a
Okay.
whole nother space right now that is going to be out of touch for people when they look at me and it's like, wait a minute, now he's over it. Like, yeah, like
Yeah,
this
that's
space
right. We always build.
and this particular subject slides right into that space. And so my book I also just finished, and it is now being it is now being typeset. And so
Yes.
I'm debating on whether or not I'm going to put it out there in July or August. But it's called Too Seasoned to Care.
Oh, nice.
And it is a story of exploration on how aging brings about wisdom and clarity in your life. And one of the things that happens with people who have found some measure of success, whether it has been in business or family or any of those spaces, look up one day and realize that they've accomplished a lot of different things, but they have not um, leaned into a purpose. It has no meaning, no real deep meaning. And
Yeah.
they begin to start asking themselves questions.
Yeah.
And goes right into your book, which is here's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why. And
Yep.
so that, you're never too seasoned, and I don't use the word old, you're never too seasoned to rewrite your story. Like
Yeah.
give your
Yes.
permission
Yes.
for the things that you think are or have been obstacles in your lives that were actually stepping stones to your success. And you have
Yes.
to honor them in that way, right? That's a flip in perspective. You have to change how you see something in
Yep.
order for it to mean something different. And a lot of people struggle with that,
They do.
especially Black people.
Yeah, they do. And I think that goes back to even the thoughts of like there's multiple paths to success. But if you only see it in one way
Right,
and you somehow go down that path and now you're miserable or it's not fulfilling,
right,
right? Now you can feel stuck. And that's where it leads to some mental health things for people. That now they feel anxious or they feel depressed versus, as you mentioned, being able to see there's another way. There's multiple other ways.
right.
And connecting my being able to then give yourself permission to go after those other ways is
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah, yeah. Tell people how they can get in touch with you, find your work, and get a couple of sessions if they need it.
Hey, I am so grateful once again for the opportunity. Best way to reach me is georgetalks.com is my website. My handle for Instagram and X is at George Talks. Same thing for LinkedIn. You can find me, just put in George Talks or Dr. George James. And I would love to be able to connect with people. I would love to be able to come and speak at your organization or company or retreat. And I'm just grateful to just be on this podcast to share and to learn as always. Kenny, I'm never around you without being able to learn and grow. So thank you for this.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Well, like I said, I'm a fan of yours. You don't see me often, but as another good friend of mine tells me all the time, I'm a low level stalker. And so I'm always around the corner. You don't see me, but I'm always around the corner.
You
I'm like,
there? Well,
he said, so if you turn around and you see a shadow disappear, don't be
it's you.
frightened. That's just me backing off, but always in support of what you're doing and champion and cheering you on.
Thank you.
So that your territory is expanded. The work that you're doing is so critical for our community and the community at large, right? Because we are in a society right now that
Yeah.
needs our thinking, right? Because it's
Agreed.
not all about black and white,
Yeah.
although it is who we are, right?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
understand that there's a level of importance even in that space that things have to be emphasized. But when
Yeah.
you look across the broad span of society in general, what you and I are talking about, we need to be in every corner of the world talking to people about how to begin to start thinking differently about relationships.
Yes.
And what
Yes.
does that look like? So I appreciate you keep championing what you're doing, and I'm sure our paths are going to continue to cross. It was great to see you at TSP this summer,
Yes.
to end up in that space. Lamar's, yes, he's another brother. It's
He's
like,
great.
dude, like he started in our space, like black and married with kids.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah. I remember I used to do work with him. That's how I've known him all these years, him and Ronnie. I really love what they've been doing.
absolutely. And so thank you again. And to all of my I Am Dad podcast listeners, you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you are kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And that's my good friend and mentor, Art Mitchell, used to always say to me, Kenny, it's nice to be important, but it's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, have a great week. God bless, and peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad Podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.